Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We're just letting you all kick in. If you're here for a session on the regional energy strategic planning with Regen and guests, then you're in the right place. Anything else, then well, maybe you've stumbled on it, and it'll be fascinating for you. If you, just whilst we're waiting for a minute, if anyone wants to just let us know in the chat, just say hello, then that'd be great. You could give us a little bit of a what's my traditional approach? A little bit of a weather report. We have a little bit of competition to see who's joining us from furthest away. At the session last week, I think Sterling won. I don't think we. So see if anyone's further away from that. Who's going to be first to say hello? Cara from Somerset, not so sunny. Reading we've got, okay. Shiva, welcome Shiva. Gateshead, okay, we've got North represented today, good to see. A30, okay. So that's dedication to join us from the A30. Stephen in Glasgow. Sunny apparently, okay. Bath, yeah, okay. We're getting a good geographic breadth, which is good to see, because of course this event is all about the nations and regions of the UK. So it's it's good to have people from right across them. Okay, I think we have a goodly number of people. Now let's just have a quick glance. Yeah, having joined, so I'm going to, I think, kick us off formally and make a start. So welcome everyone to this Regen webinar on regional energy strategic plans, and I guess more specifically today, the current consultation on what's lovingly became known as the t-RESP, the transitional RESP. I'm Merlin Harmon, Chief Exec of Regen, so I'll be kind of facilitating today. And I guess, as many of you know, Regen's mission in life is all about accelerating and providing expertise to help the acceleration of the shift to a clean energy system. And we've always kind of felt that you can't achieve the kind of scale of change that our mission and our ambition and the ambition of many people on this call have for changing the energy system, for transitioning the energy system in just a kind of top-down approach. That this kind of scale of transition is going to require the leadership and the impetus of the great kind of nations and regions of the UK. But to kind of achieve that scale of change, we also need the right, and to enable those ambitions, we also need the right infrastructure. We're gonna, the wires, essentially. We can't, everything that we all want to do in the ambitions of communities and local areas around the country, whether that's EVs and electric cars, whether that's decarbonising our heating system or energy network, heat networks, whether that's local generation, whether that's battery storage, and indeed whether that's housing growth, factories, etc. All requires having the right infrastructure. So, and to do that at this time of kind of speed of change, we're going to need a strategic plan. We're going to need to plan this carefully and properly. And so the advent of the RESP, the Regional Energy Strategic Plan, is a big step in this shift. This is the kind of the format, the formal strategic, statutory, national, if you like, approach to planning at that kind of regional and national level what pathways, what are the energy pathways we're on, what are the key strategic goals that require our energy infrastructure, and that, of course, to some, but it's important to understand, perhaps I should say, that plan. Then, plan is one thing. We can all have plans. That's great, but what do they actually change? And what this one particularly, I guess, changes is it's the building block for the price controls for the amount of for the networks, particularly for the distribution network. So, in other words, what can they spend on what to invest in that network to enable the objectives and ambitions of local areas around the country. So this plan is baked direct into that business planning process and in terms of the infrastructure. So an important moment and something that Regen very much welcomes. I think trying to look back at our first, we've done a lot of work in this space. We've seen it as important for many years. We pioneered the distribution future energy scenarios, which all the DNOs now do. We've worked a lot with local authorities. Poppy can talk about the Net Zero Living program. We work with 52 local authorities at the moment on to support them with their ambitions and plans. So always been an important area to us. And pretty much all the reports and stuff we've done over the years, we've said, we've called for some kind of regional body, some kind of regional structure or oversight or plan to help us think about the direction of travel and plan the scale of change that we need to see. So from our point of view, we greatly welcome the shift to, or the development of the regional energy strategic plan, and we recognise we're now coming towards a key moment with the consultation out at the moment, and then the final document due for January, although I suppose I should say that's the final t-RESP, and the enduring RESP is then due in 2027. So I'm delighted we've got a great panel here of experts to discuss this with us. So the agenda, what we're going to do is start with a kind of quick insight into the consultation from Principal Analyst at Regen, Jonty Haynes, who's does a lot of our work in this area, just picking out some of what we see as the key issues and features of the consultation, just to perhaps help you get into it and kind of get a sense of what's in it and throw up some issues we think are particularly important. And then we're going to come to our panel, and delighted to have Bridget, who leads this the RESP work at the National Energy System Operator, Sarah from Oxfordshire County Council, who has a lot of expertise in this area. We'll come back to that, and Poppy, who leads our local energy work here at Regen. So excellent panel, and we'll hopefully have a good conversation. After that, we'll see what it'll be interesting to see how Bridget thinks of our characterisation of her consultation. So you can look forward to that after Jonty's slot. Just in terms of how you can engage, thank you all for you've got the hang of the chat now. You've told me Motherwell, I've just seen, or Inverness. Okay, I'm not probably further north, so I think that's the furthest away winner so far. So you can use the chat to chat. I do think one of the strengths of these online formats actually is not better to be in person in lots of ways, but they do provide that opportunity to have almost a kind of side conversation, to share insights, thoughts, reports you think might find interesting. So feel free to use for that. If you've got particular questions, put them in the Q&A, and that you can then upvote in the usual way, and we'll pick a few of those questions to put to the panel towards the end of the session. And if we have some time at the end, we'll see if anyone invite people to sort of do the old-fashioned thing, if it is sort of old-fashioned to use Teams. Yeah, not sure. And actually just to raise your hand virtually and come on screen and ask. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end to do that. So that's do engage, but basically don't just leave it to your chat bot to take your notes. That would be this is really about you guys learning as much as you can. So we need your insight to do so. Okay, I think that's enough of an introduction from me. So let me hand over to my colleague Jonty for some insights, highlights, Jonty, of the t-RESP consultation that came out recently?
I'll let the audience decide their insights are highlights. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Johnny Haynes, Principal Analyst at Regen. I've got about 15 minutes here. I think that the panel session is what we all want to hear, but just as a quick introduction to the t-RESP consultation, I'll whistle through sort of the core features of it. And we've picked out a couple of things that, at least from our experience working sort of with the DNOs on their end, but also with local authorities on things like their local area energy plans, some areas we think the audience for this call could be particularly well suited to respond to. I think it's fair to say it's a really it's an impressive amount of stuff in that consultation, and there will be questions that you might answer or not answer, but I'll try and I'll do a little bit of an introduction to what that looks like from our perspective. So just to get into it, I guess it's really nicely broken down into 4 key components of the t-RESP consultation. We've got the context behind the nations and regions, so how all of the t-RESP regions, and in Wales and Scotland as their own nations, have been contextualised, what is sort of the energy situation, I guess, in those areas. There's also the pathways in this consultation, the illustrative pathways, which plot that journey to net zero, whether that's through heat pumps, EVs, solar, wind, storage, and how that looks in the near term, but also how that could potentially look under a range of futures in the longer term. Now, obviously, those pathways, how many EVs or how much solar, only gets you part of the way to what we really need on the network side, and that's where consistent planning assumptions, or refer to them now, the CPAs, come in. Essentially, these are how we can translate the volumes of low carbon technologies, generation, storage, into what does that mean for that substation? What does that mean for that grid supply point, or in future, potentially even lower down? And then finally, one that I think probably a lot of you on the call will be familiar with, the strategic investment needs. So a lot of you probably would have been responding to the request for information both out over the summer, and how these are informing potentially above and beyond standard business planning investments to future-proof the network and make sure it's ready for real sort of growth, and particularly whole system sort of growth opportunities, and make sure the grid isn't a blocker to net zero, but actually facilitates net zero. I'll go into all 4 of these areas sort of individually. I've got a slide on each, basically sort of picking out what's in the consultation, what's being produced, but also some of the questions that I think I'd like to highlight to the group. But as sort of an overall high level, I think if you read through the document and look at all the other documentation that comes out of the consultation, there's lots of great work to review and respond to. I think it is a really good opportunity at this point for local authorities and other local actors to feed in, not just influencing the t-RESP, as Merlin introduced at the start, but also sort of iterates through into the full RESP from 2027 onwards. And it is a work in progress going through the consultation documents. There are areas that are illustrative, or areas that are not as they will be in the full t-RESP. But if anything, the earlier you get into the process, the earlier you respond to consultation and such, the more you are able to shape the process. So I think it's great that we're seeing this sort of as it's being made, rather than receiving the t-RESP outputs and then having to assess them, review them, respond to them, that kind of thing. So jumping into the first element, the nations and regions context. So this is all on the consultation webpage, but it sort of details the conditions and priorities for each of the RESP nations and regions. Now, reading through this, I thought it was really familiar. Anyone who's looked into local energy planning, whether that's through the catapult style formal sort of local area energy plan, or whether that's through other forms of local energy planning, you'll probably recognise a lot of the data sets and a lot of the insights that are coming out of this. It's looking into demographics, the existing electricity and gas network infrastructure, the current state of heating and transport, industrial clusters and other sort of major economic zones, and then the baseline and increasingly the very large pipeline of electricity generation and storage as well. And it's being presented in this interactive story map style, which you'll probably have seen in other areas. But it's a really nice way of holding your hand through each of those areas. I think it'll be a taste-based assessment, but personally, I really enjoyed being able to dig into the data, dive into the maps, zoom into my local area and see what that looks like compared to a static PDF report. And actually, one thing, it sounds a bit pithy, but it actually works really well on mobile. So if you're on a train, you need a bit of, you squeeze in a bit of time to look through the t-RESP nation and region context. I personally think it works really well. In terms of what the consultation is asking and sort of some of the bits that I thought I'd pick out today, I won't go through every single question because we don't have time, but these 3 questions to me were absolutely key for local authorities and other local actors to really ground truth what's been said in the nations and regions context. So how well the nations and regions reflects your understanding of the nation and region. We know that data can only go so far, and sort of ground truthing is super important. Whether the topics included are enough of a picture, a full enough picture, or if there's anything you sort of expected to see in that understanding of your nation and region, or nation and regions that you have an understanding of, and whether the data selected for those specific topics is the right data sets to use or the most reflective data sets to use. I know personally I've been working with a few local authorities in the southwest recently over the last sort of year or so, and there's some really great knowledge there within local authorities and with some of the stakeholders we engaged around data sets that they've come across in the past that are particularly complete or accurate or represent their own internal knowledge and what they're seeing on the ground versus data sets that are maybe less complete or less comprehensive. So I think this is that sort of suite of questions, alongside, to be fair, a lot of the other ones as well, are absolutely really valuable to respond to. Second up, so the pathways. I think it's worth saying right at the start here that the pathways presented in the consultation webpage are illustrative pathways. They are not the full pathways, full model pathways, partly because of the way the interaction between the t-RESP and the DNO's distribution future energy scenarios, DFES, is working. They'll be ingesting DFES outputs from this year's analysis, which are forthcoming in the next few weeks and months, into the final t-RESP outputs that, as Merlin said, come out in January. You'll probably know this already because it's been a key factor of the t-RESP process, but it presents a single short-term view and then branching out into longer-term views, which adds a bit more sort of certainty and clarity to what those next 10 years look like, while also blending in the fact that I think if any of us tried to say we know what the energy system will look like in 2050, you'd just say that we were making it up and we were wrong. And the proposal in the consultation is to use the technology building blocks that are currently used by the DNOs and the NESO FES as a kind of common tongue to talk about solar, PV, onshore wind, all types of generation, storage, and demand. And again, it's presented in that interactive story map style. So instead of just seeing a graph on a page, you're able to zoom into the data, you're able to filter it, you're able to aggregate however you want. While the pathways are illustrative and it's not looking for responses to the data in the pathways themselves, I personally think there's some really big questions in the use of the pathways and how they're being published that, again, I think there's really useful feedback that can be gotten by the audience of this group. I'd like to focus on the one in the bottom right around the pathway being published by building block down to GSP level and how the format of the pathways, how you'd like to receive them. In my experience, one of the biggest blockers to aligning local planning, whether that's local area energy plans or other forms of local planning, with DNO business planning, with national, FES or upcoming SSCP, CSMP, that kind of thing, is where you have technology definitions or spatial granularities or data formats that don't align and don't have a clear sort of one-to-one or one-to-many relationship. It's really hard to then coalesce those two sets and actually be talking from the same hymn sheet. So I think that particularly that question 10, but again, every single one of these questions is really vital to add to. I think it's just one I wanted to highlight. If the data isn't in the right format for you to use, its usage is so much harder. So the question around building blocks is absolutely key in that regard. On to number 3, so the third sort of facet of the consultation, the consistent planning assumptions. I think I introduced it a bit at the start, but it's a really important counterpart to those pathways. So the pathways might say how many EVs, heat pumps, or how much solar, battery storage, onshore wind. But the CPAs really drive, okay, what does that actually mean in terms of the network, in terms of the substations, the infrastructure? Now, it says directly in the consultation, this is primarily aimed to drive consistency across DNO plans. And it is, I think it's fair to say, the most technical part of the process and of the consultation, particularly because defining some of these assumptions are super granular, and we're talking about how are people choosing to use their heat pumps, how are people choosing to charge their electric vehicles, how many miles are people going to do now, but also in the future. If you've got a hybrid, what proportion of your mileage you're doing in hybrid mode versus, in petrol diesel mode versus EV mode. And a lot of these, it's very hard to find really robust data sources for, and they are also evolving very quickly. So I think defining these is a gargantuan effort, but it'll be something that iterates through in future versions of this process as well. Now, I said that they're very technical, and they are, I think it's fair to say, DNO focused, but similar to some of the questions around the pathway side, I think there are really key elements that lots of people can feed into. In particular, I thought I'd highlight the question around whether your organisation will be looking to use the t-RESP CPAs for other purposes. Personally, while the CPAs are designed around the DNO network impact assessments, at least for this t-RESP, there's a really big opportunity here, in my opinion, for the CPAs to be used in other forms of energy planning, such as local area energy plans. As an industry, we've never really had a sort of agreed, reviewed set of this type of assumption, this level of granularity and impact on the network. And consistency between DNOs is great. Consistency between the t-RESP and the DNO is obviously really great. But imagine if we could also have consistency with local area energy planning or other forms of these kind of future energy planning assessments. The CPAs could potentially be a really good unlocker in making sure those things work together in a similar way to the building blocks could be as well. The other questions, again, I'm not going to tell anyone not to answer any questions. It really depends on your capacity or your department's capacity. The other question on the CPA, the thing that really came out to me was it really does require good understanding of the associated CPA methodology and detailed design document. There's a lot of really nice, strong, robust caveats around what data can or can't be used to inform a CPA and how they are produced. And so it's more technical, and it's quite a bit more complex than maybe feeding into the other two areas. And then finally, strategic investment needs. I think this one might come up quite a bit in the panel session and the Q&A as well. But it's the outcomes of that RFI undertaken over the summer, which I was amazed, over 1,700 responses, which I'll be interested in hearing in the panel session later from Bridget, whether that was above or below expectations and how that's being churned through on the RESP side. And this aims to capture needs sort of above and beyond what is captured as sort of the business as usual planning, and potentially to unlock that fabled investment ahead of need, which Merlin mentioned at the start, is something that we've personally at Regen been sort of beating the drum around, being able to unlock that forward-looking investment in the network, even if the existing network isn't quite at that need. How we actually justify that, and obviously any spend on the network comes through to consumers and consumer bills, so it needs to be a really robust, clear driver for that investment ahead of need. But if we can, through this process, unlock some of that, that puts us in really good stead for staying on track to achieve net zero and the interim carbon budgets as well. It's worth saying that the maps released in the consultation, only the DNO and the gas distribution network submissions have been fully assessed in terms of whether they meet that strategic investment need criteria and what they are, whereas the other ones, I believe, are in progress. But nicely, it does include commentary on where there are hotspots of as yet unassessed strategic investment need submissions, and pulling out some of those key topics around them, such as you can see there for the West Midlands, urban heat networks, retrofit-driven electrification areas, and a couple of others that aren't on that screenshot. In terms of the questions, I think you could absolutely answer all of these. These two came out to me as particularly important or insightful. particularly around the level of geographic detail that would be most useful in future versions. So the t-RESP are the pretty locked in geographic detail, but for future versions of the full RESP, what kind of level would be useful to inform local area planning with the strategic investment needs in mind. And that follows on to the question as well around the role that these outputs might play in supporting local planning, which I think is a really, really interesting question, how they get ingested into that local energy planning environment, and then the infrastructure and investment questions as well. So I appreciate that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour around the consultation. It'd be great to hear your questions and discuss that a bit more in the panel session. But I will pass you back to Merlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonty. That gives a really good kind of handle on the main elements of this. So let's move on now to our discussion and panel. And I think what I'll just introduce each of the panelists and then ask a couple of questions, and they can introduce themselves more fully as we do that, and then we can open up for questions more broadly after that. So Bridget, it I guess makes sense to start with yourself, as this is your consultation. Maybe if you just say a little bit more of an introduction for your role, and then perhaps just my first start with kind of view of what does success look like, if you like. What's the vision? Where is this taking us? What do you think it's going to unlock, just so we can kind of get our eye in from that bigger picture?
Okay, thank you, Merlin. So yes, I'm Bridget Hartley. I lead the Regional Energy Strategic Planning team at NESO. I've been in the role since November 23, which was, I joined 2 weeks before NESO was given the role of the Regional Energy Strategic Planner. So where are we heading? What's the big picture context for this? So the big picture context, as Merlin mentioned right at the start, is how do you make sure that the ambitions of local communities, local authorities are really reflected in the energy planning that we do from a national basis? And how do you make sure that the energy networks are actually delivering for local people? So if you think that the first phase of decarbonisation has very much been focused at the sort of big scale decarbonisation of the electricity grid. Now, going forwards, decarbonisation is going to impact every single one of us in our homes, in how we heat our homes, in the vehicles we drive. And actually, that's why getting really down to that more granular level and making sure we take these bottom-up voices into account in our energy planning is going to be so much more crucial. So there's also a lot about interactions between energy vectors that the rest will be looking at. So how the interactions between gas and electricity, the interactions where hydrogen's going, what's happening with biomethane, what's happening with heat networks, and to really deliver and develop the most efficient energy system going forwards, you need to be able to understand all these interactions going forwards. And how things have been done in the past have very much had silo planning in each of these areas. So what we're looking to do for the enduring RESP, or the full RESP, is to really get to some of those big whole energy system issues, so we can really sort of optimize and think across these energy vectors in terms of, where's the best place to invest, what's the most economic investments for energy distribution networks. So I think that whole energy piece, the bottom up piece, and the other key piece is that this really fits in with the other NESO strategic energy plans. So I work within the Strategic Energy Planning Directorate of NESO, and we've got the Strategic Spatial Energy Planning team as part of that, as well as the centralised Strategic Network Planning team. And these teams are becoming, well, they are whole energy focused teams. So SSEP is largely starting with hydrogen and electricity, but CSMP is also moving in the same direction. So we'll be all looking at whole energy plans, and we'll be looking at them in a consistent way and approach. So the rest very much sits within those portfolio of strategic energy plans, which will go from real bottom up right to sort of very strategic national plans.
Okay, that does perhaps go to your final question now, but it does lead me to a kind of question. I guess we'll try and put it in slightly stark terms. If a local area has an ambition for, they want to be the leader in solar or something, and they've got, X, they've done their analysis, and to meet their ambitions, they want X gigawatts of solar. But we then take the national strategic space energy plan that says, well, overall we need Y gigawatts of solar, and then we're going to need so much in say South and Central England, and then now we break that down, and actually from that top-down plan, it looks like we need about half of what you think of solar you need. So that's what we're going to plan our network for. Who wins, Bridget? Is it the local democracy that's saying this is what we need and we just build the network for that, or is it the top-down technocratic planner at NESO that says no, that's far too ambitious, this is actually what we need?
So I think this is where the RESP governance that we'll be putting in place probably from the middle of next year will come in. So within RESP, we'll be setting up governance boards for each RESP plan, who will ultimately have the accountability for approving their RESP. I think with the solar case, it's about what's credible. So actually one of the things SSEP is doing is looking at the environmental aspects and where solar farms can be put. So actually, if they're saying, like, from a geographic point of view, we believe the maximum capacity of that area for solar is this, then actually I think that will be a conversation that we'll need to have as the RESP team with those that particular local authority to understand why they think it's something different. We do see there being two routes between, a feed up route into the strategic spatial energy plan, as well as we'll start, when we start developing the RESP, we will start with the outputs of SCCP and interpret them for each nation and region and say, like, this is what it's saying, this is our starting point, but that doesn't mean it's our finishing point. But we will need to have really robust evidence to work out why we would want to deviate from a national picture. I think sometimes you might find there are things between different regions, for example, that there's a bit more of something in one region and a bit less in another. And I think we'll have to look at these, because it might be that these things, some of these things can just be netted off and they won't be an issue. So I think there's a bit about granularity. There's a bit about, I think, credibility is what we're looking for overall. Okay,
I think that perhaps that's helpful. And then to me, the particularly important thing, what you're saying there, is a kind of iterative discussion and debate. There's a basis for having that conversation now, and everyone can look at the evidence and have a sensible debate. Just again, just zeroing out a little bit more just on the timeline, Bridget. So we've got we've got to t-RESP in January, regional boards in the summer, and then final RESP in 2027. Is that right? Any other dates we should really kind of be focusing on? Or?
So the only other date to make you aware of is this November. We've got the consultation on the full RESP methodology.
Okay.
So that's another consultation that's coming out.
Okay. Excellent.
And there will be consultations on the 11 RESPs in the nations and regions. So those will be 11 separate reports that will be consulted on prior to.
Okay, and when's that? That's sort of later.
I think probably autumn 27, summer to autumn 27. Sorry, I don't have the exact dates.
No,
but quite a long time away yet.
That's accurate enough. I think everyone will be breathing a sigh of relief. I imagine we might have some questions about responding to all this. Okay, and final question for yourself. Jonty highlighted 1,700 strategic sites, which aren't sort of in the consultation in full, at least anyway yet. So that sounds like a big task for you guys, and they've got to produce final pathways in January. And I guess there'll be a need to kind of assess some of those, deduplicate them with the information you might already have from DNOs and DFARS type processes. Maybe just reflect on how you're managing that, and is there anything anyone else we can do to help? Are you trying to use the DNOs to help with that? How are you seeing the scale of that challenge?
Yeah, so it is quite a large challenge in terms of the numbers that we received, which I think are now over 1,800, not just 1,700. Okay. So yeah, it's quite a significant challenge. There is an initial triage process. What we're finding is that not all the data that we've been submitted is as complete as possible, enabling us to assess them properly. So we're going out to stakeholders again to see if they've got the data or the data is available that we'd need to assess them or not. So we've got teams now established in the nations and regions, and they're very much leading on this. So when we started out with t-RESP, we didn't have these teams, and those have very much been established over the last 6 months. So they are getting stuck in as one of their first jobs into evaluating their areas of SI need. And we're putting in processes to assure the consistency of those assessments so that identical projects in 2 different geographies don't get assessed differently. So, but yes, it's quite a lot to get through, but I think and we'll also be working with DNOs to make sure there's no double counts, because some of these may already be in their DFEDs. So we do want to make sure that we're not double counting some of these.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, thank you, Bridget. Let's introduce Sarah now. Sarah, perhaps you just, you as I mentioned earlier, you have an interesting background of having been elected as an official, an elected representative, and worked in the DNO, so probably a fairly unique, rounded perspective from this whole agenda. But you're obviously now working for Oxfordshire Council. So what, you've heard the sort of dream, if you like, what this is all about, and there's a lot of work, but from a point of view of Oxfordshire, why is this important? What really counts for you guys?
No, thank you. Great question. Thank you for having me here today. And just to clarify, I'm in a non-political role at Oxfordshire, so as an officer here. And firstly, I just wanted to say, while Bridget's here, we're in the central RESP region, and I just want to give a shout out to our RESP team, who have been really fantastic, really responsive and helpful through this, because obviously we're all finding our feet on this. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to feed that back. In terms of what this means for Oxfordshire, and I'm sure other local authorities up and down the country, this really is a pivotal opportunity for local ambition to be considered alongside national and regional planning, and a real chance to make the case for that local ambition. But I also wanted to highlight that for us, the RESP is so much more than just energy infrastructure. This is what's enabling local growth, net zero, resilience, social equity, all of those things, and we're sort of looking at it within that context. So yeah, we've got that alignment then of national and local energy ambitions, and that framework that's been provided that enables all of that to happen. Things like local area energy plans, something that we're working on currently at Oxfordshire with our district council, so 6 councils coming together. We've just moved into stage 5, if you're following the energy systems catapult methodology there, but it helps integrate all of this. There's it's important because it helps unlock investment, so that we're hoping that the RESP outputs will unlock that investment, help make the case for infrastructure upgrades and funding, supporting that local growth, decarbonisation and resilience. It also helps with that evidence-based planning by providing this the consistency that's really coming through. I have read the whole consultation document so far. It took me some time, but what comes through is that consistency, that uniformity. And as a local authority, that we're actually covered by 3 DNOs. I can't tell you how important that is, particularly even in things as simple as DFES outputs, where obviously we've got 2 DNOs that use Regen, 1 that doesn't, but between them, there isn't consistency, and that's going to really, really help. But it also helps us to benchmark plans, identify gaps, collaborate more effectively with network operators and neighbouring councils, and so important for our strategic planners. And then finally, it's that supporting that cross-sector alignment and coordination, energy planning with transport, housing, economic development, ensuring that infrastructure keeps pace with local priorities and that geographic alignment.
Excellent. Okay, so quite a big deal, I guess, for the ambitions of a place like Oxfordshire. So what, you've read the consultation, so congratulations. What if you had to sort of pick one thing that's perhaps more of a concern from your perspective, either whether it's a sort of particular aspect of the consultation or whether it's something about the process? Is there anything you particularly, and maybe widening that out, what would you be advising local authorities to think about and focus on, or kind of steering or guiding them or highlighting to them that they might want to think about as they try and respond to this?
Yeah, and I'm conscious that Jonty's also spent a bit of time going through the Regen view on that, and there's a couple that I would agree with, and I've got some further thoughts to build on that. I think it's really important that while the consistency, that uniformity is important, we need to make sure it's not prioritised over local ambition, and as such, I would stress that I think when local authorities in particular, but anyone sort of from a local place-based perspective is responding, be looking to ensure that local ambition is truly reflected in there. So highlight where those local plans, and I'm not just talking about local area energy plans, and I'm cognizant I've seen Cara's question in the chat and totally understand the point making about not everywhere has the capacity to be doing that kind of thing, but all kinds of plans, make sure that they're reflected, and where are we going beyond national assumptions, but it's really important to provide the evidence of that, to give the confidence to NESO that actually there is a robust plan behind this, and not simply a pipe dream. Building on what Jonty was saying earlier, and again, I've seen a question about this come up, the advocating for the granular actionable data. My understanding is that the transitional RESP is being written for the DNOs to help them with their ED3 planning, but that doesn't mean we can't get something from this. So we need to look at the outputs, how they're going to be produced, local authority project level, not just regional summaries, so they can actually support practical delivery and really thinking about what that looks like. The strategic investment need is a really key one. And I know we've all been doing our request for information, our RFI forms on that. We are one of the authorities that's got further information to put in because we aggregated ours. And actually, if we split them all out, there's about 300. But I think part of the challenge at the beginning of the process is it wasn't, because we also had the DFES at the same time, it wasn't totally clear what was a DFES bucket, what was a t-RESP bucket. And I think we went with the approach that, well, it's not our job to decide, let's give everything to everyone. Now we're sort of picking through that a little bit. But those strategic investment needs flag areas where network constraints could limit those local priorities and provide that supporting data. And a lot that's going to be new housing, EV charging, heat networks, things like that. A couple more things I would just focus on, and it is that championing collaboration here. So there needs to be that ongoing engagement, not just between NESO and DNOs, but the local authorities, so that the outputs are accessible and usable. And it's really important that local authorities aren't just consultees, but partners in this process, I would say. And then finally, the feedback on the usability. When you're looking through we saw the maps earlier that Jonty showed us, and I think I put the link in the chat there too, that I've had a quick look. Some of them are more usable than others. So some feedback on how that can be improved for clarity, accessibility, and the format. And I think I'm quite keen to understand how the outputs are really going to look at the end of this. So.
Excellent. Okay, so lots of sort of kind of quite practical issues about data sharing and formats, etc. Also, Jonty picked a lot of that up. Okay, let's come to Poppy, who leads our local authority work. Poppy, you've been engaging a lot with local authorities over the last couple of years. It's been a big part of your life for the net zero living work, supporting them. From what do you feel from engaging with them on how they approach these issues and their planning, what that's really important to them, and kind of I suppose, so what opportunities does the kind of RESP process and all these new data sets, etc., offer to hard-pressed local authorities?
I mean, I think the first issue, which I know that everyone has heard hundreds of times, is that I guess whilst being really excited about the opportunity to feed in this, structured and strategic way, that some lack the capacity, lack the knowledge, lack the sort of time and resource to really engage in the process. So I think that's sort of the heart of it, and a lot of the things that we've been doing at Regen, it's been trying to sort of help areas upskill, understand what's going on, and I know NESO and their regional teams have been doing the same thing. So I think you know, I mirror your excitement, Melon. We're really excited to see this happen. We think this has been a big gap for the future, but almost, I guess, local areas have to be a little bit careful of what they wish for, because now this has happened. That there is a resource requirement on them. There's going to be a capacity requirement on them going forward as well. So yeah, I think that's the sort of the core thing. But overarching, it's really been really positive response to the fact that this is happening, happening in a consistent manner, happening in a whole system manner as well. So yeah, it's been really, really positive. I think just picking out a couple of things in terms of, and I think you mentioned it as well, Melon, is that the really good thing is it provides a basis for a conversation, and that's almost what's been missing before. There's been information flow and discussions, but with the RESP, you now have a really consistent basis to carry on that iterative conversation. You have a place to start, you have a place to go, and you have a process to go through to get there. So yeah, it's overall really positive about that.
Excellent. Okay, that's helpful. Is there anything? I mean, I think we possibly might have a report coming out on thinking about how we could use the kind of RESP work to simplify life for local authorities as they're doing their planning in the future. And Jonty kind of hinted at some of the opportunities there to use kind of RESP data as maybe a building block or a starting point. Thoughts on how that might work?
Yeah, and I think we've seen some comments in the chat, haven't we? I mean, I think one of the areas that we're really interested to see is to make sure that now the effort that areas are putting into local area energy plans and the effort that's being putting into RESP, that they can reinforce and contribute to each other rather than sort of replicate or contradict each other and end up with a spat about whose vision of the future is correct. So we think there's important work to do now on, I guess, giving a bit more guidance to local areas about what they could most usefully do to have that constructive conversation. So I think, you know, for areas that don't have a lot of resource, this is going to be providing a really useful, I'm assuming it's coming in local authority granularity, and I think it is, that's going to provide a really useful basis to start their thinking about energy planning, whereas previously they would have had to sort of build that basis themselves, use a bit of DFEDs, etc. So I think it's that sort of, yeah, making that accessible and usable, and those maps should really, I guess, give a sort of, for those that haven't been able to do local area energy planning, should give them a place to start.
Okay, thank you. So just picking up on it, we've kind of touched on this, but just to make sure we answer it fully. So it was Cara, South Somerset, you know, and that point, maybe Bridget yourself, that, you know, that councils are, you know, famously resource constrained, a lot of time pressure, a lot of financial pressure, and so the ability to then engage and provide you with useful data in the right format at the right time, you know, might be skewed, I guess, to the better resource local authorities or bigger local authorities. You know, how do we make sure that all parts of the country can engage and respond to this? Is there any help that particularly that you guys have been able to provide or are going to be able to provide going forward?
So we are looking at this as we design the full RESP in terms of, Ofgem have talked about it in terms of local actor support, but particularly for local authorities, and especially for, we're kind of in two spaces, because one, we definitely don't want to hold anybody back. So those who've done a lot of work, we want to continue, we want to work with them and to help that work be realised through the work we do in RESP. But similarly, we then need to work with the ones that haven't done so much and haven't got so many resources to help bring them up as quickly as possible. So we've sort of got our eye on both. We don't go into the lowest common denominator, because we absolutely need to work with those who've done the most work, but we need to work out what support we can put in place through sort of some of the data and digital interfaces, through leveraging other data, through, and I know there's a lot of thinking going on in my team at the moment and what that actually means and how we do that. But that's, I think, I just assure you, that's on our radar. And one of the things, that's why throughout this consultation on t-RESP, we're really interested on how local authorities will actually be using the data, and which bits they find useful and which bits you don't find so useful, because actually that can then really help to start shaping what we do and our understanding for the RESP. Doing this for the first time, I'm sure we're going to come out with use cases from people who read through the consultation that we've never even thought about. And I think some of those would be really interesting to flag. Sort of, it would be really good if you could just do this little bit extra, and actually and it would add a huge amount of value to us. Actually, there are probably cases of that we're just completely unaware of at the moment. So if anybody sees any of that, then please just flag it to us. We might not be able to do it for January, but we can put it on the list of things to put into the full RESP.
Okay, and just specifically the question also from Matthew, Bridget, about the granularity. How easy is it going to be for somebody to say, here's my RESP pathway, here's my layout data. I can put them next to each other and compare nice and easily. Will they have the granularity of data at this stage, and if so, kind of when to be able to do that, or is that a further iteration?
So we deliberately use national data sets in this first iteration of RESP. I don't know quite how all the technical stuff of what data we've been able to get to what level of granularity. I suspect it is dependent on the data set that we were using, the level of granularity that we'd have been able to go to. I know some of them are very granular, some of them may be less granular, but that will be a function almost certainly of the data sets that we've chosen to use, and the fact that we've chosen to use GB-wide data sets. So I think we do want to be able to use broader data sets in the full RESP, but obviously you then get into consistency, data quality issues that we need to think, and also how we ingest that. So we are asking ourselves how we ingest LEAPS and their data as well, and what's the practicality of doing that. So these are the sorts of questions we are asking as we're designing the full RESP. But I would expect what we're publishing at the moment is the level of granularity that data goes to.
Okay, excellent. And Sarah, you kind of touched on the question earlier from Cara, but again, that just maybe broadening that out a little bit. There's quite a lot going on. You guys are in the midst of doing a layout. You've got the RESP coming on. There's the DFES processes. Do you have thoughts on, and you've been on all sides of this fence, do you have thoughts on how we can bring all this stuff together, making it coherent, consistent, easy for ourselves? We're not making our lives really complicated by just having lots of different data sets and knocking around that no one can make sense of.
Yeah, I have a number of thoughts there, and the challenge is, even those authorities like ourselves that are a bit better resourced, this is still hard, because these are whole organisation approaches, and the notion of strategic energy planning is not embedded into our organisations. Going out to the organisation earlier this year to ask for inputs into both the DFES and the t-RESP process, we make decisions on to where to put these assets based on where there's current capacity in the network, rather than actually where it's best from a place-based perspective. So I think there could be some support that would be very useful to local authorities around that socialisation at all levels, so that the whole organisation comes with us on this. There's obviously, the DNOs have obviously been investing in teams to help support local authorities with that sort of more local area energy planning side of thing that fits into this. I don't know what NESO's plans around local actor support are, but it'd be good not to double up and complement what's already in place and strengthen that, definitely. something we've been reflecting on. So we're going to be starting a project soon here where we want to make sure that this becomes part of our business as usual environment, and it's not an annual project where we try and grab as much data as possible to input. And as part of that, we're looking at very clearly inputs and outputs. And from an input perspective, what would be really useful is some stakeholder personas. So from NESO's perspective, what are the different kinds of stakeholders you want to get information from? As local authorities, we are conveners of people and shapers of place, and we don't know who NESO contacted and who they didn't, what information was already in there, and to know where the gaps are. And actually, if we could work collaboratively on how we can recognise the different kinds of stakeholders and all their different roles, I think that's going to really help all involved with developing those inputs. And obviously the outputs, working out how we're going to use this and what we need to do with it. I have seen also the post that's been put in by Steve about local energy plans.
Yes, I was going to come to that.
A data standard. It's behind a paywall, so I can't actually read it, and it's obviously probably not going to happen in time for most authorities by the time the first enduring RESP comes out. But it's so important because there is this, there is such a challenge. But it's not just supporting the development of leaks, but also the delivery of them as well, and thinking ahead to that as well, because it's all very well having a plan, but it's then actually NESO is going to need the confidence that these are actually going to happen to then make those decisions about where the investment needs to be. But really pleased to see that what's coming out. If we do get some statutory requirement, that'd be fantastic.
Yes, so there's been a good chat going on in the chat around around potential amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill from the government. There's a link to Utility Week article, which is behind a paywall, but there is also to the amendment itself that's been put, and to the kind of government announcements, which doesn't give you a lot of detail. So interesting to see how that kind of I think there's probably quite a long way from an amendment to a bill to an act to then actual regulations. And
I think they've got 12
guidance,
to 18 months to do it. I think that was in the Utility Week article. So 12 to 18 months to work out what the actual plans would be for it.
Okay, so the background here, I guess, is that many of us, I've had plenty of conversations myself with officials in DESNES, have argued that local places are a key part of this transition, and indeed quite a lot of government policies, whether heat zoning or retrofit under Warm Homes Plan or EV charging, actually expect or require local authorities to do various things, but there isn't very much. Local authorities are then left to try and plan all that stuff themselves. There's no coherent guidance as to how that all should fit together. What does government see as the role of local places? What planning should they be doing? It's all a little bit it's a bit ad hoc. And so to be honest, government's been pretty resistant to this for quite a long time. But it looks like there might be some chink in that armour, and we might get a bit more kind of national policy guidance, sort of governance on what planning local authorities should be doing on the energy side. So that's one to watch. So come back to John Tiano on the more specific questions, but just before that, Poppy, I was going to just ask on the kind of governance. Sarah hinted at this or touched this. We're asking local authorities to put in evidence to a process which could influence critical infrastructure, which could decide whether projects are able to go ahead or not in their area. But that presumably will need a governance process. Obviously, we might touch on we're part of an innovation project in West Midlands and National Grid electricity distribution called Planning Regional Infrastructure in a Digital Environment, which is trying to look at some of the ways we bring all this stuff together and the governance processes. What are you seeing in terms of how local authorities are going to kind of manage this process and the governance that they'll need to put in place in order to kind of engage fully and respond properly?
Yeah, we did a report last year, a sort of guide for local authorities on some of the sort of areas they need to think about for RESP. And number one was governance, and I think this RFI over the summer has probably got people's it's really brought that into sharp relief, I guess, that there was an RFI needed to be completed, and they didn't necessarily have the governance structure to send that up to and get that signed off from and get inputs from the rest of the organisation. But that would have started, we think, that thinking in the organisations. And some, for example, this RFI sat in their economic development team, which is potentially the right place for it to be. There were others that did this from the climate side and net zero teams, etc. So at the moment, there's been a real sort of variety in the way that people have been getting that RFI and responding to it. But we think, if they got some future visibility, like Sarah said, that they will want to have this in an enduring sort of governance processes going forward, and that should allow that, hopefully, that whole RFI process to be a bit smoother than I think it was this year. The other area that that Pride is looking at, and I think there is going to be a role going forward, perhaps for those strategic authorities where they exist, or where they're going to be new strategic authorities, to support with that sort of process, to help upskill and to help guide that sort of governance process and support those that upskilling across the local authority. So that within Pride is something that the West Midlands Combined Authority is attempting to do, including a sort of digital, how can they then share that information across them and multiple stakeholders, which I think perhaps this, some of the RESP work and that mapping could also start to achieve as well. That sort of, we can have a governance, but you need to have a basis for your conversation. You need to have a place to share your information, and that's what we've seen in the t-RESP has made a good start on.
Okay, so that's worth people being aware of if they're thinking about governance themselves, as the West Midlands kind of Combined Authority giving that quite a lot of thought, albeit in their particular context, but may be useful. Okay, just going back to the questions, I got one from Jess on the treatment of consumer flex in longer term forecasts. So I'll throw this at Jonty, and I guess it's a question about not just assuming that more demand equals it's just straight adds on to peak demand, and we have to build one-to-one network and generation capacity, but can we be smarter in the way that we use this? Can we have more consumer flexibility? I mean, this does take us into some quite complicated questions about how the potential for consumer flex to address problems on the network, whether it's a temporary thing where it knocks demand back, which might then rebound higher, and you get into quite complex areas. But in terms of the planning you're seeing, Jonty, and how this kind of issues, how would you respond to Jess?
It's a really good question, because I think it's one of the biggest sort of uncertainties around what the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years will look like. We're right at the beginning of the S curve when it comes to adoption of of domestic, at least, flexibility. We have people on agile tariffs. We have people doing smart charging on their EVs. We have some early adopters looking at flexing their heat pump demand and that kind of thing. And obviously, historically, going back many decades, like storage heating is probably like the prototypical example of consumer flexibility and how that avoids network problems. I think it's one of the, it does feed into the CPAs, and I think that's a really challenging thing to really define. I think it really just emphasizes how important it is that this becomes a really iterable, constantly improving process. Not just that we'll get better at modeling the energy system and have a greater understanding of what net zero looks like as more people take up low carbon measures and we install more renewables and the grid decarbonizes, but also as we understand what consumer behavior looks like in an energy system that has a lot more, potentially a lot more variable pricing, as we have a lot more renewables on the network, as we have a lot more people who are able to shift a greater and greater proportion of their electricity demand as they take up electric vehicles or heat pumps. And then you even get into the really tricky part of what does V2G look like? Does that play a role in the future energy system? And if so, how much? Because that is something that almost doesn't exist right now. I know Octopus have their offer out, and there are some people doing sort of V2G, but in terms of what that could contribute to the future energy system, if you look at NESO's future energy scenarios, in some of those scenarios, and it is only some of them because of that uncertainty, it could play a really massive role in shaving some of that peak demand, or taking on some of that burden when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. So I think, I think it's a really hard question to answer, but because it's so hard to answer, it just reinforces that we just need to iterate on this process every year, and as the evidence emerges, basically around that flexibility side.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Jonty. And I think that's definitely right from our point of view. I think there's some really important areas there on smarter networks, how we use stuff more flexibly, and that's really important. You see 12 gigs in the Clean Power Action Plan, but there are perhaps also some slightly heroic assumptions sometimes about just how much flex can achieve, and understanding what it can and what it can't achieve, and where you might get tensions between local and national. So I think there's a lot for us still to try out and learn there. It's almost impossible to in an event like this these days to get through without discussing data centers. So you'll be pleased to know that Martin's highlighted that issue for us. So Bridget, how many of those 1,700 are data centers or data center clusters? Are we, and I guess that kind of broader question of how RESP is interacting with kind of local growth zones and these sort of key government priorities around growth areas more generally.
So I can't give you precise numbers, but I will say some, because I know that there are some. I think what's interesting is that we also asked the gas distribution networks for their strategic investment need, and some data centres came back as part of that response as well. So you've got data centres looking to connect to gas grids to do combined heat and power. You've got some data centres looking to connect at electricity distribution level, and you've also got some looking to connect at an electricity transmission level, just because of the amount of demand. So this is an area that NESO is actively looking at across all of our strategic energy plans. And I think this is where, having all of those plans coming together in a more strategic way really, really helps to understand the interactions between transmission and distribution for these, power hungry technologies, as well as the interactions between gas and electricity for some of these plants as well. So yes, we have had a number of data centres come in as part of our strategic investment need questions.
Okay, and Sarah, are they in your submissions? Are you having AI growth zones in Oxfordshire? Are they?
We have an AI data centre growth zone in Oxfordshire in the south, below Oxford, but the ones that are coming forward that we know of are transmission level connected, so we did not put them into the t-RESP because that's obviously for DNOs.
Okay, excellent. Jonty, from our work doing distribution future energy scenarios for networks, this is becoming a topic that we're all very interested in. And I think our latest Defence for NGED will have a specific report on this which I think they're planning to publish, and we've been engaging with some of the data center companies as part of that. Any comments on how that might, it's is this all positive stuff for the it's networks, or is there a risk that we're kind of that they'll jump, is there a risk that local authorities come up with all these important strategic priorities, meeting all the goals that Sarah has said about social and carbon and extra, and then actually what we do is create a bunch of capacity that data centers come in and grab most of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's worth considering that as a possibility. It's like, the data center queue is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and obviously on the generation and storage side for electricity, we've seen the great queue reshuffle, connections reform happening to try and account for that and make sure that projects that are ready and viable and such don't get held back. I think it's yeah, I haven't worked too closely on that project, but it's good to soft launch that. Yeah, we are doing some work for NGED, looking at their data center queue and how that might evolve in the future, and just the amount of things that are changing with the advent of AI and potential AI use for data centers alongside the conventional uses, whether that's massive hyperscale ones or edge data centers closer to sort of sources of demand. It is a really rapidly changing picture, and fundamentally they are massively power hungry. And we've already seen, I think it was that project in the northeast was looking at sort of a hydrogen site and competing with a data center for potential power. I think it was an AI growth zone, competing for a transmission scale grid connection up there. So I think that's only going to increase. And yeah, I think it is something to be wary of. Maybe that's as far as I can say at the moment.
Okay. I think it does tee up an important point. I might get your comment on, Bridget, quickly. Is that all of this, we're trying to help local authorities, we're trying to help the networks plan strategically, and we're telling them what's coming out, but we do still have the same connection rules. And so, putting something in one of these processes doesn't give you a connection. So you still need to go through that process, and if you're not quick enough, or there's a lot of demand in your area or whatever, that capacity that you've almost, how do I put it, you've led to the creation of, doesn't actually mean it's yours. It could still disappear into other uses. So I don't want to oversimplify that, but I think it's an important to get that in the end, if you want to connect a thing to the network, you have to reply to a connection and follow the usual rules. Would that be fair to highlight, Bridget?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to highlight. So this, it being, well, we're still working out how to display the sort of strategic investment needs when we come to January, but in no way does being included say that you've definitely got that capacity. You have to go through normal processes, and in no way, if you don't get included for any reason, does that mean that you can't take part in those connection processes. So I think this is intended to enable a level of investment ahead of need, where we can see clusters and areas of development coming in, probably rather than specific individual projects, which we'd expect just to be dealt with through a normal process. So it's more about, actually, if one project comes in an area, one connection request, actually it's about giving DNOs a heads up there might be several in an area coming in, and actually to treat them all, try and think about it more holistically, as opposed to thinking about it on an individual project by project basis. So I think about it as that sort of investment ahead of need, where they can see a number of things happening in a particular geography that are all going to need connecting, but they probably could all happen over slightly different timescales within a few years of each other. And actually it makes sense to think more holistically about what the network needs to do in that area, as opposed to thinking on a project by project as they come in basis. Okay,
and just last question for yourself on that, Bridget. There's a concept of an in-development register. Are you able to articulate the role? So you have a strategic investment need, and then in-development register. I think it might have been something Poppy might have played a role in popularising some time ago as an idea as well. But how does that play into the picture?
So this requirement came in as part of the, as it was the National Infrastructure Commission at the time, now NISTA report into electricity distribution, where in addition to the SI need element, we were asked to keep an in-development register. So how that's going to work is anything that's sort of not identified as a particular area or project of SI need at the moment. We will keep that in our initial in-development register and track how those projects are progressing over time, if they're becoming less certain or they're becoming more certain even. And as we get more clarity on things like energy demands from them, we will update them so that they can sort of form the basis of the next iteration of strategic investment need as we go through the different RESP iterations. We're not planning on publishing that in January, so just to be really clear that we will keep that to ourselves for the moment, as we try and work out through the full RESP methodology what that actually looks like. But it would be a real shame to throw all the really valuable insights we've got from people, even if they're not quite ready to be included at this point in time. So we will be keeping them, but we won't actually be publishing them in January.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. I might come back to you for a final word, but let's just go around the panel and give them all a final word. Poppy, maybe, but kind of one thing that you're really hoping for out of this process, and one thing you would kind of just, you know, for the people on this call, to go away, read the consultation, put in consultation responses, explain it to their colleagues in local authorities, you know, why it's also important. One thing you would just kind of highlight to them.
Oh gosh, yeah, I guess I think I've probably already covered it. Actually, I think the sort of the impetus of RESP should really start to embed sort of energy and investment need and net zero sort of across the governance of local authorities, because like Sarah said, they're there to sort of shape place and create a better space for their people, and this is really fundamental to what the local authority is doing. And a lot of the conversations that I've had have sat quite siloed in a particular part of the local authority, and it'd be great to see this spreading that across the whole organisation. I think the area that we have flagged before was around business engagement. So to me, that's a bit of a sort of question mark, a bit of an uncertainty about how the local authority engages or advocates or talks to its key industries and businesses in this context. Do they, as a local authority, advocate for that directly to the RESP? Do they encourage those organisations to do that themselves? How can we make sure that all of the sort of important industries and growth drivers in a local area are also participating in this process? So I think for me, that's a sort of bit of an unanswered question, I think, for local areas as to what role they want to take with their sort of wider businesses, industries, job creators in this process.
Excellent. Okay. Jonty, final word. You spend a lot of time working with networks on, you know, engaging with between local authorities and infrastructure, you know, and the networks, and thinking about the links between those goals. Any kind of last thoughts on what you would, you know, on how you feel we can improve those processes of trying to bring all these, you know, different planning and different parties together in a coherent kind of process?
Yeah, I think two things. So I think it's fair to say that the interaction between DNOs and their network planning processes and local authorities and their local energy planning isn't perfect. There's definitely some friction points. We can work to resolve them as much as possible. I think I highlighted it in my slides a bit. There's a few sort of programmatic differences that things like consistent building blocks and consistent planning assumptions, I think, will go some way to solving. But I'm also really encouraged, I think, by the direction that the full RESP is looking to take, with that sort of much more granular look at what the future energy pathways might look like. So I think that will give has potential to give a really nice framework to really get all these different actors who do have different drivers and different ways of thinking in units they work in, a way to sort of come together and really sort of share knowledge and actually turn that into not only how do we build a network for that kind of business as usual planning, but how do we get those strategic needs built in to the local plans, into the network plans, into national plans as well, when we build all these little building blocks up to that national picture, and actually get that network build out ahead of need that sort of we've been pushing for quite a while, but haven't quite had the kind of framework to quite get that moving. Because I think there's a common goal within all of that between all these companies, and this is a really nice way of trying to tie it all together. It's a big task, but I think it's got real promise.
Yeah, thank you, Jonty. I'm thinking of my first conversations with Ofgem about strategic investment ahead of need, about maybe more than 10 years ago, and the kind of flat no we definitely don't do that. You know, if people bring us projects, we give them a price, and it was pretty deep in the psyche of Ofgem, and I think probably the networks, you know, along that was the way it happened. So it's taken some time, but if we look at what's coming out through the RESP work of Bridget and her colleagues, and if you look at the sector-specific methodology consultation, there's another. If you think this is long, that's 258 pages of Ofgem's finest. There's no maps in that, so that's really you might want to get ChatGPT on that one. There's a very clear switch there, in the words of Akshay at the call, who's Director General, at the front of that, a very kind of, this is a big shift. We are now planning this net. We are now going to plan strategically and try and have the infrastructure ready for the aspirations of places like Oxfordshire ahead. And that is, and that is really and right. When they explain that, the first building block of that is the t-RESP. That's the thing that's really going to enable them to do that. So, and all the work of the DNOs. So, so it is we are seeing something of a sea change. It's quite hard to believe that we weren't planning the network at all strategically, but that was very clearly the case. So this is a big shift. Just for and there was a question about microgrids and whether this is thinking about incorporating those kind of things in, which plays a bit to Jess's question about local flex into the planning assumptions. And I think at the moment the truth is those are very small scale. I think that from our perspective there, that it really takes you into an area we think of as local supply, the ability to supply power, generate and supply power locally, whether that's through private wire, whether that's through a kind of microgrid, off-grid, or whether that's indeed over the public network, but to somebody very near you, and the rules around how you do that and the costs, etc., which are still really not very clear in regulation. And we're hoping then we've been putting a lot of effort into pushing in the local power plan, which we're hoping will come out at some stage in the not too distant future, for government to really kind of get a grip of the policy intent around those areas, because it's not impossible, but it's really not very, very clear. And if we have that, then possibly the potential for those kind of schemes to encourage greater balancing of supply and demand as the local area in a way that the networks can really kind of value and see reduces to flow loads on that network higher up is, I think, would start to become clearer. But at the moment, it's still a very difficult thing to do in a regulatory sense, and it's still pretty small scale. So that's a quick comment on that one. Sarah, final comment from your perspective, everything you've heard. How positive, I guess, are you feeling about this process, having which is perhaps something you've been working on in various guises quite a long time, and perhaps coming to a pretty key point now?
Yeah, no, a really good question. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. Okay. I think in order to aspire for what we're looking for Clean Power 2030 and beyond, we can't let perfection get in the way of progress, and that's really important. And what's been going on with the transitional RESP has been done at pace before the teams are in place. And I'm very much looking at this consultation as a way to also help me when the enduring RESP methodology consultation comes out. We can draw on our experiences of how we've interacted with that to take that even further. But this whole RESP process is a significant step forward in aligning national and local policy, and the commitments to engagement and transparency is really, really welcome. I mean, we're fortunate here in Oxfordshire, and through the LEAP process, we actually have a governance board, a strategic board that has all the directors of local authorities on it. We have NESO on there, we have our RESP manager, we've got all the DNOs on it, we've got the GDN. So, but it's just taking this further. I guess from my perspective, success is going to depend on a few things. So, and fundamentally, that's how well local evidence and ambition are integrated and not just averaged out. And that's what I'd really like to see. But also how the responsiveness of the process to changing local needs and new data and how that's going to work. We're not necessarily going to see that in the transitional RESP, but how the enduring RESP takes that into account. But it's fundamentally about how the RESP outputs drive real investment in action, not just analysis. confidence for us in local areas is going to come from delivery, not just the consultation. So we welcome that ongoing dialogue. The clear feedback loops is going to be really important. And I've got to be able to go back to my colleagues, my directors, my politicians, and say all this work that we've done, it is producing those results. And I'm just going to reiterate again something I said earlier. Local authorities must absolutely remain active partners, not just consultees in this process.
Great. And final word to yourself is probably appropriate, Bridget. Maybe you might reflect on Sarah's view there, which is probably a good summary of how local authorities generally are seeing, what's important to them. And, maybe a last sort of call to the audience in terms of responses and what you're really hoping to see and what you'd love them to respond on.
Yeah, so we're absolutely committed to working with people in a really collaborative and transparent way across all of the RESP teams. So that sort of in any time, hopefully you all know your RESP manager. They're pretty much all in place apart from East Midlands, which I think they're joining in the next month or so. So we have teams in place now who you should be getting to know. This is the first time for us doing this. This is the first time this has been done anywhere in the world. We're going to be learning together as we do it, and we're going to have to change and flex and adapt our approach. There will be a level of consistency that we'll need to have, and one of our big questions is, how much regional variation of variation nations and regions that you have versus how much we have to do consistently. I think as we move into the full methodology consultation, that will be something that we will be asking for views on. But yes, really help us to understand which parts of, starting with the t-RESP consultation, which parts are really of value and where we can work together to adapt what we're doing and what we're proposing to really drive as much value to you and to your people who sort of are in your areas and regions as much as possible. That's going to be absolutely key to us, and you have far more insights on this, although there are a number of people who've come from sort of local authority backgrounds, and pretty much all of our teams in the nations and regions live and work in those nations and regions and know them well. But I think just getting those insights is really, really key for us to understand how what we're producing is going to be used beyond a DNO or beyond a GDN, to see where we can add as much value as possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bridget. And I think hopefully, thank you very much to all our panelists for their contribution. Hopefully everyone on the call feels a little bit more clear, I guess, on the RESP overall, the picture, the vision, and the various elements, and this kind of key part of the process now. Just before we let you all go, just going to flag up a couple of kind of upcoming events and announcements and the like. So just briefly a reminder that you can, if you go back a slide quickly, John, you can join Regen if you're in the industry, and we have a local authority membership as well. So if you're wanting to get access to Regen's insights, etc., then that's a route to do that. Just look on our website or contact the team. And some other events coming up. Felicity has been running all the tech on this behind the scenes. Do you want to just run through those quickly?
Absolutely, yes. So for all things electricity storage, come to our ESN annual conference and join us with Minister Michael Shanks as well. We have a new event. We've got a planning conference in London at the end of January. The very first one, so we're looking at changes to the planning system, we'll be exploring that. And then the very next day, we have our Rewire Summit, again, the first of these events. And this is our Women in Renewable Energy Network. So we want to support diversity within our sector. And lastly, we have the Green Energy Awards coming up. So watch this space because nominations will be open soon. Back to you, Manny.
Thank you, Felicity. Back to me in the studio. Is that it? You've obviously playing out your wish to be a roving reporter. You'd be pretty good at that, actually. I think that maybe.
Thank you.
Those are open to local authorities amongst others to put forward the best kind of local authorities and schemes, etc. to the Green Energy Awards, which is obviously an opportunity to celebrate all the hard work and great work that you're doing. Okay, so having run through that, just as I say, we're bang on time. So thank once again all of our panel, particularly Bridget and Sarah for joining us today and bringing your insight. There's some important and key time, a lot of change going on, but important to shape it all. And of course, most of all, to thank all of you for coming along and participating and sharing your thoughts and questions. And no doubt we shall have further opportunities to discuss the regional energy strategic planning with you all in the coming months. But enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and you're free to go. Thanks.